Hi, I'm Colin Dunn, and in my career in the government and afterwards, after retirement, when I started another career as an organizational consultant, if I've learned anything, it's the importance of communications. I mean, it's critical, isn't it? How much cost occurs? How much do we lose in terms of money and time because of miscommunication or people not feeling understood? How much does it damage relationships at work and at home? And because of that importance, it seems fitting that we spend some time talking today about clear communication. On the screen now, you'll see a picture of the Titanic. It's a drawing of the Titanic as it hit that iceberg over 100 years ago. In the lower left-hand corner is a picture of the radio man who was aboard the Titanic. About an hour before that ship hit that iceberg, the radio man, Jack Phillips, was busy in the radio room sending messages from important passengers to the next port of entry. He was interrupted by a message from the Californian, another vessel in the vicinity. That message said, "We are stopped. We are surrounded by ice." Jack's response was, "Shut up, I am busy." Sometimes we're so busy trying to communicate that we fail to communicate. George Bernard Shaw said it this way: "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." Let's take a look at why. Why do we have this failure to communicate? On the surface, it doesn't seem that difficult. You've got a sender, in this case a man sitting at the table talking, and then you've got receivers all listening intently to the man. There is a feedback loop coming back from the receivers to the sender, so we should be good. Problem is it's not that simple. First of all, the sender has an idea in his head of what he wants to say, and then he translates that into words. So right away, there's a loss in that translation. Add to that the fact that each of the people listening to him have their own perception of what they're hearing, and it's likely different perceptions. On top of that, we have barriers that we're trying to work with. It could be that this guy at the table here doesn't even like the sender, and that's coloring his reception of the message. It could be that this guy over here is really not paying close attention, even though he's looking at the sender. He may be thinking, "Is it my turn to pick up the kids today?" And there's other barriers like distractions that get in the way. And well, because of all that, you can see just how hard it is. But what we can work with, we know we can work with this, we can work with the two pieces of the puzzle that are human: the sender sending the message and the receiver receiving the message. Let's start with the receiver. This is a picture of Stephen Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In those 7 habits, he's been given workshops on all 7 habits, but the one workshop which he gives the most workshops on is the 5th habit. And this is it on the screen. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. What are we talking about? We're talking about listening. The problem with listening is most people overrate their ability to listen. Most people believe that as a listener, they're up here. But if you were to talk to the people to whom they listen, they would rate them down here. I call this gap the coefficient of self-delusion. Why is that? What's the problem with listening? Well, one problem with listening is people don't have patience. They don't have the patience to listen. On the picture here on the slide, there's a picture of Dr. Groupman. Dr. Groupman, who is a member on the faculty of Harvard Medical School. He wrote a book about 5 or 6 years ago called How Doctors Think. And in that book, he asked doctors that when they were making a diagnosis on a patient, and a patient was in the office, what was the single most important source of information for them? All the doctors said the same thing. The patient's the single most important source of information. Then Dr. Grootman timed these same doctors as they saw patients and timed how long these doctors allowed patients to speak before they interrupted them and gave them a diagnosis. In your head, how long do you think that was? If you said 18 seconds, you were dead on. Now, I think most of us may not realize it, but we're probably guilty of the same thing. We're probably 18-second listeners. We probably let people speak for about 15 to 18 seconds before we interrupt and give them our opinion, or before we interrupt and tell them what the solution is to whatever they're dealing with. And we need to give them a little more time. Let's look at some levels of listening and see if we can get our hands around this. The first level of listening is selective listening. Sometimes people call this listening in bursts. My teenagers used to do this very well. They would hear the part about, here are the car keys, but they wouldn't hear the part about be home by midnight. Now, we all do this to a degree. We all listen for what we want to pick out and disregard the rest. And we don't want to be there at that level. The next level of listening is a little better, but it's those doctors who are listening to interrupt and us who are doing the same thing. Sometimes we do this when someone's talking to us and they're going to cover a couple of things. They talk about point one, they're going on to point two, but we want to say something about point one. So what are we doing? We're checking out, and we're going over in the tape in our mind how we're going to respond to point one when the speaker takes a breath. In both of these cases, we're checking out. Well, that's not so bad, you might say. Oh, it isn't? Think about it this way. When you're checking out when someone's talking to you, in either one of these two levels, what are you saying to them without really saying anything? When you check out when somebody's talking to you, the message you're sending is, I don't care and you don't count. Now, I don't know two things that are worse to say to some person if you want to have clear and open and transparent communication. We need to get beyond these levels, and we need to get to the level of active listening. And active listening is defined as listening with your body and your words and your mind. How do you do that? Well, you know how to listen with your body. You turn and you face the individual. You have eye contact. You know how important that is. Shakespeare said, the eyes are the windows to the soul. You know how important it is to nod your head, and how important it is to have active facial expressions as someone's talking to you. You know how to listen with your words, too. You know how to paraphrase when someone's talking to you. Now, let me see. I think this is what you just said, and paraphrase it, and then ask if you got it right. Sometimes what you need to do is just repeat a few exact phrases the person says. Sometimes what you need to do is ask a question. We know how to do that. Well, what about that third part? We've got to listen with our mind. Now, that means being in the moment. And that's, a lot of people say that's the hardest part, being in the moment with your mind. I ran into a guy from South African Army one time who told me something that helped me remember how important that was to be in the moment, not check out with our mind. Here's what he told me. He said that in the Zulu tribe, there's a traditional greeting that's gone on for centuries. It's part of the Zulu culture. When one member of the Zulu tribe meets another, they say hello by using this word, sawubona. The answer back, hello back if you will, is sikona. Here's what it means. Sawubona means I see you. Sikona means we are here. I asked my friend for more explanation, and this is what he told me. he said, when the first person greets the second person with hello, what they're really saying is, I see you. I see no one else. The answer back from the other person is, and we are here. We are nowhere else. To remind both parties to be in the moment. This greeting has to occur before a conversation ensues. To remind both parties that it's time not to mind travel, it's time to be present. And it's helped me a lot in my ability to be a listener. It's helped me go a little farther. Let me leave you with this one final thought. As a listener, do what you'd like if you were the sender. In other words, listen to the people that are talking the way you'd like to be listened to yourself. Now let's move from the receiver to the sender. The first consideration in being a sender is this. You've got different impacts of your message. I mean, you've got a visual impact, which is what you see. You've got the vocal, which is how you say what you say. And then you've got the verbal, your word choice. Now, there was a study done at the National Training Laboratories in Bethel, Maine, where they measured the impact of people's messages in these three categories. And it's been replicated in venues in other areas with the same results. The visual, of course, is what you see. It's what you see right now on the screen. It's my body language. It's my gestures. The vocal part is how I deliver my message. It's how fast I speak, how slow I speak, what I emphasize. And lastly, it's the verbal piece, which is the words I choose, my diction. What's the impact of each of these components on your message? What do you think out of 100% the visual impact is? If you said 55%, you're exactly right. How about vocal? What is that? That's 38%. Leaving a whopping 7% for the words that you choose. Now, before you object too much to this research, let me put it to you in another perspective. For most people, you know on a ratio of about 8-to-1, 8 more faces than you know names. Think about it. You've been in an airport, you see somebody, oh, I know that guy, I know that woman, but can't remember their name. See, we're visually wired. We're wired to have that impact visually. And so that's why that face-to-face communication is so much better in terms of creating understanding than email is. Let's take a look at some tips that I can give you in being a good sender. First, ask for feedback. Stop yourself from talking at some point and ask somebody who's listening to you for feedback. All right? Does this make sense to you? What's your opinion? Showing respect for someone else's perspective is a great door to open to further communication. Sometimes we forget this, and we forget the very important lesson that in conversation, con is part of that. And what is the Spanish for con? It's with. Sometimes we forget and have versations with people, one-way street. That's not good communication. And then listen to them when they give you feedback. Take it under due consideration. You'll probably learn something. Secondly, think about where your focus is. When someone's communicating, sometimes they're so wrapped into themselves that the focus is, do I have Spanish in my teeth? They're so focused on how they look. They can't focus on anything else. You want to get beyond that to the next level, which is what? That's focused on your message. What's the next thing I got to focus on in my what's the next item I have to cover in this presentation? And you want to get beyond that to the point where you are focused on your delivery. You're together, you've got that. You know what your message is, and you're just focused on your delivery. But that's not the end state. Where you want to be, finally, is focused on your audience. You've got all those other pieces put together, and you're focusing on your audience, the nonverbals that your audience is sending you about how well you're coming across. And that will do what? That will tell you when to stop and get feedback. That's where you want to be focused on, your audience. And respect other people's time and opinion. One of the best things you can do when you're on the phone to somebody, you pick up the phone, you call in somebody, understand that your to-do list is not the only to-do list in the world. They've got one as well. So why don't you try this? Pick up the phone, call someone, and say to them, is this a good time to talk? Showing respect for their world. That opens all kinds of doors in relationships as well as communication, just because you show that kind of respect. Also, honor their opinion, even if it's different than yours. You know, we just have to get over ourselves every now and again and remind ourselves we're not right about everything. Our perspective is not perfect. Honoring somebody's opinion is another door to open to make communications go better. The fourth tip that I want to leave with you is use media packaging. What do I mean by that? I mean, use multiple media to reinforce each other. For example, at a face-to-face meeting, a very important face-to-face meeting, sometimes a good practice is to go back and send out an email to everybody who was at the meeting, summarizing what happened at the meeting and who's going to do what. That adds a lot of clarity to your communications. Another way of thinking about packaging is within one medium, for example, email, you can package your information and make it easier for the receiver to consume it. Let's take, for example, in email, the subject line. It's great if you can make the subject line like a headline in a newspaper, something that summarizes in poetry what the whole message is. Maybe you've gotten one of those train of emails that's been kicking around for a week or so, and you're adding your piece, but maybe the subject has changed. Change the subject for the people that you're sending it to. The same is true within an email. If you're going to send an email to someone and you have a request or some piece of information that you want, put the bottom line up front. Put that in the first line of the email. If you have other information, package it so it's easy to read. Use bullets. Maybe use bold occasionally if that's allowed. In other words, think about the receiver more than you think about yourself. It's not about you, even though it takes more time as an email to send the email. It's not about you. Get over yourself. It's about the receiver. They'll respect you for it. The other thing I want you to remember is Jack Welch, former CEO of General Electric, said that the secret to communications is simplicity, consistency, and repetition. He said only by the steady drumbeat of those three concepts do you get across what you need to get across and create understanding. Please remember those as you communicate. Lastly, I want to give you a tip of preparing. Some messages you can't do off the cuff. You've got to prepare for them. And I'm not just talking about briefings. I'm talking about things like bad news. When you've got to deliver bad news to somebody, you can't just come in and blurt it out. You've got to prepare that delivery. Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel, said it this way: the worse the news, the more effort should go in delivering it. And preparation is so critical that sometimes we overlook it and think, well, we don't need to practice this or think about it very long before we deliver it. A friend of mine ran into the presidential spokesman a few years ago, and he recognized him, so he went up to him and said, "Hey, you're the presidential spokesman. I see you on TV. You're giving press briefings every day, and you do a pretty good job of it. And you answer all those questions from the reporters pretty well. What's your secret?" The answer? Preparation, preparation, preparation. At the same time you remember to prepare, you also need to remember how important it is to be authentic, to be genuine. I'm not talking about preparing to the point that you have a canned delivery, a rehearsed message that sounds rehearsed and doesn't even sound like you. Let's face it, we don't trust canned deliveries. We don't put a lot of stock into too much rehearsal. So don't take your persona out of the picture. And that takes us to the summary. Every good communicator should summarize what he or she has just said. So I'm going to do that now. First, remember to listen. Seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. Secondly, ask for and give feedback. Don't have the versation, have the conversation. Thirdly, choose the right media and package it correctly. And remember Jack Welch's advice: simplicity, consistency, repetition. The last thing is plan some messages. You need to plan some. Prepare as appropriate, but be authentic in your delivery so you come across as the real you, because people put a lot of stock in that. Here's what I want to leave you with overall in communications. It is my belief that in organizations, you cannot over-communicate. It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it for the understanding that occurs. Let me give you a couple of books to look at. I like Dr. Bailey's book, Writing and Speaking at Work. It's the book that's used at Harvard Business School. It is the most complete book, I believe, ever written about all kinds of communication in the workplace. It is expensive, I will tell you that up front. What's not so expensive is Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because it has been out so long that you can get it on Amazon for a couple of dollars. But it's a classic, and it's a great book on communications. Thirdly, Carrie Patterson's book on Crucial Conversations is a good book that talks about difficult conversations that happen at the workplace and at home. And he gives you kind of a roadmap about how to think through those kinds of conversations. It's my hope that in this talk today, I've been a good sender, delivering this message of communication to you and how important it is to have clear communications. I hope you've received it. And as a result, I hope you are a better sender and a receiver from this point forward. Thanks for watching.